going on YouTube? Dirty Harry here back with a new video, primarily TNA based, but more so about the overall industry. So I read an article today saying TNAs are cutting their pay-per-views down, which is something that a lot of fans in general have been saying should happen industry wide for well, primarily affecting the big companies. The WWE primarily. TNA cutting their pay-per-views, it does not show them as a weak company. It shows them as a smart company, more so than anything. And for all you WWE fanboys and fangirls, let's look at WWE. Really be real and call a spade and analyze every pay-per-view they put out for the last year. You know, if the pay-per-views were not WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, Survivor Series, or SummerSlam, was there anything screaming about those other shows? Watch me, watch me, watch me. Maybe Extreme Rules, I'll give a pass to, but every other pay per view, nah. And that's not going back at just last year. I'm talking about the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that. You know, I think cutting down to only promoting the big four for both companies, TNA and W, is a great move. W is not doing it, but TNA is. I wish WWE would also do it. Having 12 pay-per-views may be the primary reason why their storylines and storytelling suck so bad lately. You know, they just don't really have the time to really push the story out there for us fans to feel it. You know, and most people are gonna probably roll in their eyes like, well, in the Attitude Era. Well, I got news for you. It's not the Attitude Era anymore. You know, Attitude Era was, you know, a great time. I was a fucking 10-year-old kid during the Attitude Era, loving every show. Every show was watchable. If you missed a show of the Attitude Era, you hated yourself. You know, you hated going to school and listening to all the kids talk about, oh, did you see that shit last night? Oh, did you see? And hearing them quote The Rock and Austin, you hated it. Because you're like, damn, I missed that. That shit sounded amazing. But now you can miss 4 months of wrestling. You can miss 6 months of wrestling like half the IWC is. You got guys swearing off wrestling the way fucking priests and monks swear off women. It's the industry has changed. We fans have changed. We've grown. The average wrestling fan base, they're either little kids or us grown men who grew up watching the sport who just can't seem to let go. You know, being a pro wrestling fan, it's a lot like being an abused housewife. You hang in there and you just hope and pray every day it's gonna get better. You think about the good old times, about the honeymoon, and then you get your ass kicked again, and you just rinse and repeat. That's what being a wrestling fan is nowadays. We've been getting our asses kicked for the last 3 months, and then we get a shot in the arm of The Rock and CM Punk going at it on a mic, and everybody wants the dick ride again. And half everyone's gonna just pack up and go, probably after either Mania or Extreme Rules, you know? Which, it's not sad. I don't blame you guys. There's more better things to do out there now than watch Raw or Impact, especially this week's Impact. That shit sucked so bad, you know? It just it doesn't take a genius to realize that wrestling companies are not making as much off their filler pay-per-views as they used to. Just ask yourself, how many pay-per-views did you actually order last year, and how many did you watch on the internet for free? How many pay-per-views did you feel actually deserved your hard-earned money last year? Mania was the only one last year that I felt the need to pay money to see. That I said I have to see The Rock and Cena before anyone else. That I have to see Triple H versus The Undertaker in that cell. You know, but it's just not that way no more. You look at WWE's case. They hired the soap opera writers from ABC. All My Children, etc., etc. And you look at those writers and what they've been doing for so long. Soap operas don't have pay-per-views or huge blow-up events per month where the storyline just goes into a whole new fucking gear, and you're like, oh my god, you know. A soap opera follows the same shit it's been following for the last 40 years. It's the same old shit. Someone gets pregnant, this person's in the hospital, there's a wedding about to go on, someone's cheating on somebody, and then at the end of either spring, fall, summer, the season, you get something huge that happens. Some character that was supposed to have died, but they never found the body for it comes back, and changes everything for one episode, and it all just keeps following itself again and again, you know. But at the same time, it keeps their key audience interested. The desperate housewives love to watch that shit. But grown men don't like to watch filler stuff. They don't like to be strung along week after week. I'm sure little kids don't even like it. I'm sure the average little kid doesn't really watch Raw. They watch their favorite wrestler, which is probably Super Cena, do his cure cancer. I don't care that the fans boo me, etc. His little stick, and then they turn the show off and probably play their PlayStation. Because if they do, I'll applaud them. I don't hate John Cena. A lot of people hate Cena, just because everyone else does it, or just because you need someone to direct the blame at. Cena took a step back. I'm not saying what he's doing ain't lame right now. That shit, nah. I don't like it, but I don't hate the guy. He's not the primary suspect to blame for everything. I honestly think the WWE is going to be on PBS or Disney by the end of the year if they don't shape it up. You know, but yeah, I think if the WWE copied what TNA is doing, will I give them shit for it? Yeah. But at the same time, I'll applaud them at the same time. We don't need 12 pay-per-views a year, especially with the recession and half the world not even having a job right now. Who's gonna pay, money. You already got enough bills to pay. Who's gonna pay $40 to see a filler match, to see, you know, the Shield come out and help CM Punk retain his title again, rather than when you got a real legit threat like The Rock who pops up only for the big four pay-per-views, and it is must-see TV. You have to see this. You can't go on Bleacher Report and read the results and have that same feeling as people who are actually watching it. So I'm all for TNA doing that. I think all other companies should do it. Just stick with your big four pay-per-views and spend the rest of the time actually entertaining us rather than feel like you're on a time crunch. You know. Now on to TNA Impact. TNA Impact sucked. I'm not gonna talk too much about it. I'm just gonna shrug and say this: nothing really groundbreaking still has happened with aces and eights. You're still losing matches, and I think a 5-year-old can beat them single-handedly at this point. Bully Ray is still stuck in a storyline with Brooke Hogan, and they've got this bullshit wedding going on next weekend. You already know what's gonna happen. Bully Ray is probably gonna get interrupted and attacked in some way, either by the aces and eights, or Hogan's gonna come out and be a prick, or you may even have Hogan come out and applaud him, and then we're stuck with Bully Ray and Brooke for who God knows how long. Hardy, Bobby Roode, and Austin Aries, nothing significant happened. It was just filler. The whole show was built around Bully Ray and Brooke Hogan, which is where I went wrong. A show should never be built around anyone except the world champion. You look at back when Aces and Eights was actually relevant. They were relevant because the champion was a threat to be attacked by them. You had Austin Aries getting his arm fucked up by the arm breaker, which is how the arm breaker got his name, etc. Now you already know what's gonna happen. You're gonna have Sting come out, say some cheesy bullshit. You have Kurt Angle make some fucking crazy threat, and Samoa Joe just gonna stand there like that, and you're gonna get a bullshit match that's just filler. It's Jeff Hardy. I don't like the fact that he's champion now. I've already said that, but at the same time, show some respect to the damn title. That champion should be on the screen at least 30% of the show. I don't care if you show him fucking listening to his iPod backstage. He needs to be on that screen more. Instead of Hogan, oh Brooke, oh nobody wants to see Hogan. We've been seeing Hogan forever. No one wants to see Hogan no more. At least not in the way that they're presenting him. Hogan could be good for TV. They're just presenting him in the wrong way. You had your reality show, you had Hogan Knows Best, etc. And we've already seen Brooke Hogan in a beef brought up with a guy who likes her. You saw it with Randy Orton back in the day. And yeah, it's a little different, but at the same time, we are overdosed on Hulk Hogan as TNA fans, man. I liked how back when Hogan, after the whole Immortal thing tanked, he just took a step back. You didn't see him on the screen that much for a little bit. You saw him come out, make a few matches, talk shit for maybe 5 seconds, and we got our matches. You know, if Hogan popped up on the screen maybe once every 2 weeks, I'd be fine with it. You know, I could deal with it. But it's like you're dedicating the full show to Brooke Hogan and Bully Ray, neither of who's a champion. I'm not saying don't have segments, but the show should not be built around anyone who is not the world champion because it takes the importance away from the world champion. And maybe it's a huge reason why Jeff Hardy's title reign feels so lackluster. You know, if the Aces and Eights aren't doing anything to Jeff Hardy, I don't really care. You know, I think that's why they're so irrelevant now. Nowadays, they just hang in the back with two strippers. They're doing a bullshit swerve angle where you can easily see, Ken Kennedy. Yes, I'm calling him Kennedy. You know, where he's gonna probably swerve and turn on the Aces and Eights, and they just attack nobodies. They attack people who are not champions, and they get stalked by Sting, who's nearing retirement home age. Impact sucked. It was just another filler episode. Maybe next week they'll do something groundbreaking, or maybe not. I'm not gonna hold my breath. Also, I'm gonna do a WCW video of my top favorites. I was asked to do one. I've been unsure of how to do it. A certain someone I'm a fan of named Brian did a really good video, and I'm just trying to think of a better way to do mine than you guys just staring at me. Yeah, I like this guy because of this, and I like this guy because of that. Now, I want to do something a bit more better than that. I'm not gonna do a top 50 like Brian did. I may do a top 10 or a top 15. Maybe a little longer, but I'm not gonna go as long as 50. There weren't 50 wrestlers in WCW who to this day I remember and think about. You know, but that's all I got. Impact sucked. In conclusion, and I hope that WWE adopts the whole just do your big four pay-per-views. We don't need all these other ones.